They thought he was just an old black man, easy to bully, easy to break. But when Elijah Thomas made one simple phone call, everything changed. What happened next didn't just shock the bullies, it sent a message that echoed through the entire town. This is a story of quiet strength, unstoppable courage, and a community's power to stand together. Stay until the end, because you won't believe how it all unfolds. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move, you challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. In the golden haze of a late afternoon sun, the air shimmered with heat, and the scent of frying oil from the Redwood Café lingered in the breeze. It was the kind of small-town diner tucked along the rolling hills of Asheville, North Carolina, where truckers and locals gathered to swap stories over bottomless coffee and home-cooked pie. Yet that day, beneath the painted skies, something was different. A quiet tension hummed just below the surface, waiting to snap. Elijah Thomas stepped out of his weathered Ford sedan, with deliberate grace, leaning heavily on a polished cane that glinted under the fading sunlight. His posture was dignified, his clothing neat, a pressed button-down shirt tucked into slacks, a coat draped lightly over his shoulders, and a hat that had seen better years but still sat proudly atop his silver hair. His gait was slow, but his presence filled the parking lot like the low roll of thunder. Passers-by glanced his way most, with the usual mixture of curiosity and quiet indifference reserved for the elderly. But not all. Near the far edge of the lot, a group of bikers lounged against their glinting motorcycles, their voices sharp with crude laughter. Their leader, a burly man named Cole Jensen, eyed Elijah's approach with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. His companions nudged each other, their leather jackets creaking, as they straightened to better enjoy the show. Cole's voice cut through the air, loud and laced with contempt. "Hey, Pops, lost your shuffleboard game." The others barked laughter, a sharp, unsettling sound that clashed against the fading quiet. Elijah paused his cane, tapping softly against the asphalt. His dark skin, his age, the subtle tremor in his hand as he adjusted his grip on the cane. These were things they saw and dismissed. But they didn't see the glint in his eyes, the unshakable calm that settled over him like a mantle. He met Cole's gaze with a look that was neither fearful nor confrontational, just steady. "I'm here for a cup of coffee," Elijah said, his voice smooth as if he were discussing the weather. Cole pushed off his bike, his boots grinding into the gravel as he swaggered closer. "Coffee, huh? Looks like you might not make it to the door, old man." The air thickened as though the sun itself held its breath. A few diners inside the cafe glanced out through the windows, but none moved to intervene. Elijah's lips pressed into a thin line, his hand tightening briefly on the cane, but his voice remained level. "I'll be just fine." The challenge was so quiet, so subtle, that for a moment Cole didn't register it. Then the smirk twisted into something darker. He snapped his fingers, signaling the others to close in. The crunch of boots against gravel grew louder, echoing off the walls of the cafe. Elijah stood his ground, adjusting the brim of his hat with slow precision, as though the scene unfolding before him were of little consequence. One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck, leaned closer. Ain't you got somewhere else to be? Grandpa Elijah didn't flinch. Right here suits me. The weight of his words was like a stone dropped into a pond, subtle but impossible to ignore. Cole's smirk faltered just a fraction, the first crack in his veneer. The younger man's laughter grew uneasy, but he covered it with another jeer. What you gonna call? For backup with that cane. And that was when Elijah reached into the pocket of his coat. His movements were deliberate, precise, neither hurried nor hesitant. He drew out a simple flip phone, its case worn smooth from years of use. The bikers chuckled, a low, mocking sound. You gonna call your grandkids to save you, old man? Cole sneered. Elijah opened the phone, pressed a single button, and lifted it to his ear. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly across the lot. It's time, he said simply, then snapped the phone shut and returned it to his pocket. The bikers exchanged glances, confusion flickering across their faces. Their bravado faltered, replaced by the faintest tinge of unease. What the hell was that? One of them muttered. Cole scowled, taking a step closer, trying to reclaim control. You think you're scaring us with some mystery phone call? Elijah's expression didn't change. He leaned lightly on his cane, his eyes calm, almost serene. But in the stillness of the moment, it became clear that this wasn't a man who feared them. This was a man who had seen far worse, endured far more, and had emerged from each trial with the quiet strength of a mountain. And it was precisely that silence, the refusal to cower, the unwavering calm that unsettled them more than any threat could have. For a long beat, the parking lot held its breath. Then, faintly at first, but growing louder, the low rumble of engines approached from beyond the curve of the road. The sound was not chaotic but steady, measured a growing presence that sent an involuntary shiver down the bikers' spines. Cole's scowl deepened, his bravado cracking like thin ice. Elijah shifted his weight slightly, his gaze steady as he murmured, I believe you'll want to stick around for what happens next. And with those few words, the trap they hadn't even seen began to close. The silence that followed Elijah's quiet declaration was a tangible thing, thick with the weight of unspoken threats and mounting confusion. The bikers shifted on their feet, casting glances at one another, their earlier swagger beginning to fracture under the strain of an unease they couldn't quite place. Cole Jensen's jaw clenched tighter, a flicker of something sharp flashing behind his eyes, disbelief perhaps, or a mounting irritation that this quiet old man was refusing to play his role. Look at him, muttered the wiry biker with the tattoos, his voice dripping with derision. He thinks he's got something up his sleeve. Cole grunted, stepping closer, his boots grinding against the gravel like a countdown to something inevitable. You think you're clever, huh? He said, his voice dropping an octave, the false amusement thinning into a blade of menace. This ain't your day, old man. Maybe you should think real hard about what you're getting yourself into. Elijah's only response was a faint smile, a subtle tightening of the lines around his eyes. He stood his ground, his cane tapping lightly against the asphalt in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was not the action of a man who was backing down. It was the signal of someone with the patience of stone waiting for the storm to pass. Inside the café, patrons watched with a growing sense of unease. A middle-aged waitress with short blonde hair hovered near the window, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. One of the truckers, a burly man with grease-stained hands, muttered under his breath, but didn't move. No one did. They all knew the unspoken rule of encounters like this: stay out of it. But Elijah's quiet resilience was unsettling. It wasn't the brash, reckless courage they were used to seeing. It was something quieter, something that made the onlookers lean closer, as though drawn by an invisible thread. The air felt heavier with each passing second. The younger biker, emboldened by the lack of response from both Elijah and the gathering crowd, stepped forward, his voice rising. "You think you're too good to answer, huh? You think you can just stand there, like you're better than us?" Cole raised a hand, silencing him with a single sharp gesture. His eyes locked onto Elijah's, the lines around his mouth deepening into a scowl. "You don't know who you're messin' with, old man," he said quietly, almost conversationally, though his tone was laced with venom. "You think a phone call's gonna save you. Out here, it's just us and the road. No one's coming." Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "The road runs both ways," he said softly, his voice low and steady, "and you do well to remember that." The words, though softly spoken, carried a weight that made Cole flinch. He recovered quickly, masking the brief crack in his facade with a loud, mocking laugh. "You hear that, boys? The old man thinks he's got us all figured out. Maybe we should teach him what respect looks like." The bikers closed in tighter, their bodies forming a loose ring around Elijah. Their movements were aggressive but hesitant, as though part of them was still grappling with the undercurrent of something larger they couldn't quite name. The rumble of engines in the distance, still faint, but growing steadily louder, hadn't escaped their notice. They shot uneasy glances toward the road, but Cole forced a laugh, trying to drown out the disquiet creeping into their ranks. "What's the matter, Jensen?" Elijah asked, his voice a quiet murmur that carried effortlessly in the charged air. "You were louder a minute ago." The slight taunt, so calmly delivered, seemed to ignite something in Cole. His face twisted, and he took a step forward, his hand rising as though to shove Elijah back. But before he could make contact, the rumble of engines grew to a crescendo, the deep, throaty growl of motorcycle engines filling the air like an approaching storm. The sound was different from the scattered individual engines of Cole's crew. It was unified, rhythmic, a convoy moving as one. The biker's bravado faltered visibly. Cole's hand dropped to his side, his scowl deepening as he turned his head toward the sound. The others followed suit, their earlier smirks fading into uncertain grimaces. The line of motorcycles emerged from around the bend in the road, sunlight glinting off chrome and polished black paint. They rode with precision, their movements synchronized, their presence undeniable. The lead rider was a woman, a tall, broad-shouldered figure, clad in a weathered leather jacket, adorned with a simple but striking patch, a tree encircled by a chain symbolizing strength and unity. Her helmet glinted as she dismounted, her gaze sweeping the scene before her with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many confrontations like this one. Behind her, the rest of the convoy came to a stop, engines idling but throbbing with a barely restrained energy. Cole's shoulders stiffened, his lips pressing into a thin line as he muttered, "Who the hell are they?" Elijah's faint smile returned, a flicker of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "Friends," he said simply. "Friends who know that respect isn't given, it's earned." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence unraveling under the weight of the newcomer's silent, unified presence. The woman stepped closer, her boots crunching lightly against the gravel, her expression calm but resolute. She nodded once at Elijah, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. "You okay here, Mr. Thomas?" she asked, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Elijah nodded, his voice as steady as ever. "I'm just fine, thanks to you." The bikers hesitated, the realization dawning that they were no longer in control. Cole opened his mouth to retort, but the words faltered and died in his throat as the woman's gaze pinned him in place, calm but unyielding. Now she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "How about you and your friends? Find somewhere else to be before you regret your choices." The quiet threat, so calmly spoken, hung in the air like a verdict. The bikers stood frozen, their bravado shattered, caught between the weight of Elijah's unshakable calm and the undeniable presence of the convoy that had come not with noise, but with silent collective strength. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and there was no mistaking who now held the upper hand. The arrival of the Guardians brought with it an unexpected shift, a crack in the oppressive tension that had clung to the parking lot like a heavy fog. Elijah Thomas, standing resolutely in the face of Cole Jensen and his ragtag crew of bullies, felt the change before the first engine even roared to a stop. It was a subtle but undeniable shift, the quiet promise of support of a network of people ready to stand beside him, no questions asked. As the Guardians dismounted their bikes, the air seemed to thrum with an energy that was as steady as it was profound. These were not just riders. They were a collective force, bound by more than leather jackets and chrome. Their movements were deliberate, confident, and synchronized, the kind of presence that spoke of long-standing loyalty and shared purpose. Each one carried the weight of experience, the silent understanding that strength wasn't just in numbers, but in unity. Elijah's heart beat steadily in his chest, a rhythm that matched the slow thud of boots on gravel as the Guardians formed a loose perimeter around him. They didn't need to speak. Their silence was louder than any threat, more powerful than any shouted challenge. At the forefront was the woman who had first spoken. Her name was Ruth Callahan, though few outside the Guardians knew it. She was known among the riders as Redwood for her unshakable strength and resilience, as immovable as the trees that had stood witness to countless storms. Cole Jensen's face twisted in a mixture of confusion and rising dread. His earlier bravado had cracked, but now it shattered completely under the weight of the reinforcements. His crew shifted uneasily behind him, their laughter and taunts gone, replaced by wary glances and the sudden realization that their dominance was no longer assured. The Guardians were a force that couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be pushed aside with a sneer or a threat. Ruth took a step closer, her gaze flicking briefly to Elijah before settling on Cole. "This ends now," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm finality of a verdict. There was no need for threats, no need for raised voices. The quiet certainty of her tone cut through the air like a knife. Cole opened his mouth as though to protest, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes darted between the Guardians, searching for any sign of weakness, any gap in their unified stance. He found none. His smirk from earlier was gone, replaced by a thin line of frustration and growing fear. Elijah, feeling the shift, straightened slightly, though he kept his hands calmly resting on his cane. "I told you the road runs both ways," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "You thought I was alone. You were wrong." For a moment, the parking lot was a study in contrast, the tense, uncertain silence of Cole and his bikers against the unwavering, steady calm of the Guardians. The bystanders inside the café watched, their faces pressed to the windows, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. The weight of the moment pressed down on them all. Ruth folded her arms across her chest, her stance casual but unyielding. "You need to understand something," she said, her tone still calm, but with an edge of iron beneath it. We don't tolerate cowards who think it's acceptable to pick on those they think are weaker. We stand together. Always. A ripple of agreement moved through the guardians, subtle nods and quiet murmurs of assent that resonated with unspoken solidarity. Cole's crew, once so bold, now looked like shadows of themselves, their earlier confidence draining away, like water through cracked concrete. One of them, the wiry man with the tattoos, shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, "This ain't worth it, Cole. Let's just go." But Cole, though visibly shaken, couldn't bring himself to fully surrender his pride. His voice, when it came, was brittle and forced. "This is just a misunderstanding. We were just messing around." Ruth's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained composed. Messing around, she echoed, her voice low. "Is that what you call it? Intimidating an elderly man because you thought you could? I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next." The silence stretched taut and electric. Elijah's calm, unshakable presence, combined with the quiet authority of the guardians, created an atmosphere where even the loudest bluster couldn't find footing. Cole's hands clenched into fists, but he knew on some instinctive primal level that this was a fight he couldn't win. Finally, he exhaled sharply, a sound that was more a hiss of frustration than anything else. "Fine," he spat, though his voice lacked the venom it had held earlier. "We're done here." Ruth inclined her head slightly, a subtle nod that acknowledged the concession but did not forgive it. "Good choice," she said softly. Cole turned sharply, motioning for his crew to follow. They hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing uneasily between each other, but eventually fell in line, their boots scuffing against the gravel as they retreated. The guardians held their ground, their silent, watchful presence ensuring that the bikers' exit was nothing less than complete. As the sound of their motorcycles faded into the distance, replaced by the low hum of the guardians' own bikes, idling, a quiet exhale of relief passed through the crowd. Elijah met Ruth's gaze, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Thank you," he said simply. Ruth stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "No thanks needed, Mr. Thomas," she said. "You stood tall when it mattered most. We were just here to make sure your voice was heard." Elijah nodded his gratitude, quiet but profound. As the guardians began to remount their bikes, the hum of engines rising once more, the sense of quiet strength lingered in the air. It wasn't just about a confrontation, averted. It was about a message sent, a promise kept, and the enduring power of community. Elijah's quiet resilience, backed by the solidarity of the guardians, had rewritten the script that Cole Jensen and his crew had tried to impose. In the end, it wasn't noise or violence that won the day. It was calm, unwavering courage, backed by the quiet force of those who refused to let injustice go unchallenged. And as the guardians rode out their engines fading into the distance, the message remained clear. Unity is strength, and no one, no matter how underestimated, stands alone. The sun dipped low over the horizon as Elijah Thomas stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching the last of the Guardians' motorcycles glide away into the distance. The roar of their engines faded into the evening hush, but the resonance of their presence lingered like a warm, steady pulse in the air. The faces of the bystanders, once lined with apprehension and fear, now reflected something different: relief, gratitude, and an unspoken acknowledgement that a quiet, steady hand could turn the tide against injustice. Elijah felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones, a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction mingled with the exhaustion of a day that had tested his patience and resolve. He turned to the small cluster of cafe patrons who had ventured outside, drawn by the confrontation and the unexpected show of solidarity. Their murmurs filled the air, not with the sharpness of gossip, but with the softer, more thoughtful tone of a community reevaluating its own assumptions. A young woman with a name tag that read Jenny approached cautiously, her hands nervously smoothing her apron. "Mr. Thomas, are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle but tinged with lingering worry. Elijah gave her a reassuring nod, his voice warm but steady. "I'm fine, Jenny. Thanks to the guardians and to people willing to stand with what's right." Her expression softened, and she hesitated before speaking again. "I've worked here for years, and I've seen them cause trouble before, but I've never seen anyone stand up to them like you did. It means a lot to all of us." Elijah's lips curved into a faint smile. Sometimes it just takes one person to remind others that fear isn't the only option. As Jenny returned to the cafe, the quiet around Elijah felt less like emptiness and more like a breathing space, an exhale of tension replaced by the first stirrings of hope. But Elijah wasn't content to let the message end in that parking lot. The fight against injustice wasn't over. It had simply shifted its battleground. He knew the Guardian's support was a powerful symbol, but true change required more than symbols, it demanded action. In the days that followed, Elijah became a quiet but steady presence in community meetings and town hall gatherings. Word of the parking lot confrontation had spread not just as a story of an elderly man standing against a gang, but as a testament to the power of community and the importance of standing together. At each gathering, Elijah spoke not of anger or retribution, but of respect, dignity, and the right of every individual to live without fear. He collaborated with Ruth Callahan and the Guardians to organize a local initiative, one that would provide support and resources for those facing intimidation or harassment. They called it the Stand Strong Coalition, a name that echoed both resilience and unity. The coalition set up workshops on legal rights self-defense classes and community watch programs. It wasn't about creating vigilantes or fostering confrontation, but about giving people the tools and confidence to stand up for themselves and for others. Elijah's involvement wasn't loud or attention-seeking. He preferred to listen, to offer quiet guidance, and to share his own experiences when it helped others find their voice. His calm, steady presence became a touchstone for many in the community, proof that strength didn't always wear a uniform or ride a motorcycle. Sometimes it sat in a wheelchair, spoke with quiet conviction, and reminded everyone that injustice, no matter how ingrained, could be challenged. As the coalition's efforts grew, so did its impact. Incidents of harassment began to dwindle, not because fear had shifted sides, but because a sense of solidarity had taken root. People were less willing to look away, less inclined to believe that someone else would step in. They realized that justice wasn't just the responsibility of courts and police. It was a shared commitment, a promise to each other. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elijah sat on the front steps of his small home, a cup of tea cradled in his hands. Ruth joined him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp with quiet determination. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the neighborhood settle into evening calm. "You know," Ruth said, after a while, her voice thoughtful, "when we first pulled into that parking lot, I thought we were just helping out a friend. But it turned into something bigger, didn't it?" Elijah nodded slowly. "It did. But it was always bigger than just me. It's about all of us. about making sure that no one thinks they can silence or intimidate someone just because they think they're alone. Ruth's lips curved into a smile. You're a quiet force, Elijah. The kind that makes people think twice before they cross a line. He chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. Maybe, or maybe it's just that people are stronger together. Sometimes they just need a reason to remember that. The evening air grew cooler, but the warmth between them remained. They talked of plans for the coalition, of future meetings and workshops, of ways to ensure that the message of unity and resilience continued to grow. It wasn't about building a movement that relied on a single moment or a single person. It was about creating a foundation, a network of people who knew that justice was a collective responsibility. As the first stars pricked through the twilight sky, Elijah felt a deep sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new faces of injustice, but for the first time in a long while, he felt as though the community had found its footing. They weren't just reacting to fear anymore. They were building something stronger. In the quiet that followed, with the night settling gently around them, Elijah and Ruth sat side by side, two figures silhouetted against the fading light. They didn't need words to fill the space between them. The steady hum of crickets, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant laughter of children playing in the street were enough. It was a reminder that justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one they were determined to walk together no matter how long the road. Elijah Thomas sat on the weathered porch of his small home as twilight deepened the sky, melting into shades of lavender and gold. In the hush of the evening, he could hear the distant murmurs of his neighbors, the soft shuffle of footsteps, the occasional burst of laughter from children playing. It was a comforting tapestry of sound, the ordinary woven with the extraordinary, a community that had shifted subtly but undeniably in the wake of recent events. His hands rested lightly on the arms of his wheelchair, his posture relaxed, but his mind alert. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and conversations sparked by that fateful afternoon in the parking lot. The Guardian's intervention had catalyzed more than just an apology from the bikers. It had ignited something deeper within the town's fabric. A sense of solidarity that had long been dormant now hummed quietly beneath the surface, a reminder of what people could accomplish when they stood together. Elijah knew the Guardian's appearance had left an indelible mark, but he also understood that true change was sustained not by grand gestures, but by the steady persistence of ordinary people. His role, as he saw it, wasn't to be a hero or a symbol, but to nurture the roots of resilience that had taken hold. It was about ensuring that no one else felt as vulnerable or isolated as he had in those moments before help arrived. As he gazed across his street, he noticed small, almost imperceptible changes. A couple of teenagers lingered by a neighbor's fence, talking quietly, rather than loitering with sullen defiance. Parents who might once have hurried their children inside at the sight of trouble now greeted each other openly, exchanging small smiles and nods. There was a new lightness in the air, a recognition that strength didn't just come from physical power. It came from connection, from the quiet decision to look out for one another. Ruth Callahan's truck pulled up outside, and she stepped out, carrying a box of flyers for the next community meeting. She approached the porch with an easy familiarity, her expression warm. "We're getting a good turnout for the next workshop," she said, setting the box down. "More folks want to get involved." Elijah nodded, his voice soft but resolute. That's good. It means they're starting to see that this isn't just about reacting to what happened. It's about building something stronger for everyone. Ruth settled into a chair beside him, her gaze following his out across the quiet street. You've done more than just stand up for yourself, Elijah. You've reminded us all that we have a responsibility to each other. That's not just bravery, it's legacy. He turned to her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Legacy isn't something you plan for. It's what's left when you do what's right over and over until it leaves a mark. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the quiet punctuated by the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. It was a peace earned not through confrontation, but through understanding and the resolve to change what needed to be changed. Elijah's thoughts wandered to the future of more workshops of conversations that would ripple through households and schools of young people growing up with the knowledge that standing together was the norm, not the exception. He thought of the guardians, their silent strength, a reminder of what collective power could look like. He thought of Ruth, of the neighbors who had come forward, of Jenny from the diner, who now handed out flyers and organized support circles. He didn't need recognition or praise. The quiet progress unfolding around him was enough. The fear that had once lingered in corners and whispered in cautious voices was dissipating, replaced by a subtle but steadfast courage. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Elijah felt a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment. His life story had taken a turn, not because he had sought conflict, but because he had chosen to stand firm in the face of it. And in doing so, he had sparked a change that would outlast him, a legacy of strength, woven from quiet conviction and a belief in the power of unity. Ruth's voice broke the silence, gentle and thoughtful. What do you think comes next? Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his voice calm but certain. We keep building. We keep showing up, and we make sure no one else ever feels like they have to face this kind of thing alone again. They sat side by side as night embraced the world around them, a pair of quiet sentinels bearing witness to the beginning of a new chapter, one of strength, resilience, and unwavering community. Elijah Thomas's story is one of quiet resilience, unyielding dignity, and the transformative power of community. What began as a simple, quiet afternoon at a roadside diner quickly spiraled into an encounter with hostility and prejudice, an attempt to silence and intimidate a man who had done nothing more than exist in a space others believed he didn't belong. But what those bikers didn't anticipate was Elijah's unbreakable spirit and the network of solidarity he could summon with a single deliberate phone call. It wasn't a dramatic act of defiance or a loud confrontation. It was a quiet assertion of his right to be respected, to stand tall even while sitting in a wheelchair, and to remind everyone watching that dignity and respect are non-negotiable. Elijah's refusal to be intimidated echoed louder than any insult or mockery could. His calm demeanor, his steady presence, and his ability to call upon a network of allies, represented by the guardians of the road, turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into a powerful declaration of unity. This wasn't just a story of a man overcoming adversity. It was a testament to how communities can and must come together to stand against injustice. When the guardians arrived, it wasn't about revenge or aggression. It was about making it clear that no one stands alone when they're surrounded by a community that values justice, kindness, and mutual respect. This story is a profound reminder of the power of connection and the importance of speaking up, not always with loud voices or grand gestures, but with the steady courage to say, "This isn't right," and to stand firm until justice is done. Elijah's journey is a lesson for us all that no matter how old we are, how we move through the world, or how others may perceive us, we possess an inner strength capable of inspiring change. His quiet heroism reminded his community of the importance of looking out for one another, of creating spaces where everyone feels safe and valued, and of transforming moments of fear into catalysts for solidarity. The key takeaway from Elijah's story is that real strength doesn't come from confrontation alone. It comes from resilience, community, and the ability to remain true to oneself. His experience teaches us that we don't have to face challenges alone. Whether it's standing up against injustice, supporting those who are marginalized, or simply being present when someone needs an ally, each of us has the power to make a difference. In today's world, where acts of division and cruelty can feel overwhelming, Elijah's story offers a beacon of hope. It reminds us that small acts of solidarity can ripple outward, transforming not just one life, but entire communities. If Elijah's story resonated with you, if it sparked something in you that says I can make a difference too, then we invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue to share stories that matter, stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us all that change begins with each of us. Let's keep these conversations alive. Let's build communities rooted in justice and kindness, and let's write the next chapter together. Subscribe now and be part of the movement that believes in the power of unity and the quiet strength within us all.